I tried to put together something that would be as close to kind of what a normal day was. And I don't know if you have, if you're prone to take pictures. I take lots. And so I worked through them, and I thought, man, I got it all put together. And so I start going back through it, and I find another several hundred pictures that I got. How are we going to do all of that? So I didn't. Just so you know, if you want to, one of these days, I can give you my iPad and you can scroll through them. Took a lot of pictures of just kind of what the old city was like. So it's kind of a typical Mediterranean city, small streets, vendors everywhere in the old city. So here we go. Let's see if it works. Okay, so why go to Israel? Well, hey. I didn't think I put together a comedic slideshow. So a few years ago, you all have met Jason. Jason has been here a couple of times. And I met Jason, I didn't realize it had been almost 9-10 years ago, online. And then we met at an event and have become good friends. Some of you know who were here when Jason came the first time and brought his first book that he has what he calls stage serious cancer. It's something beyond necessarily what we normally call stage 4. That was what his doctor said. In other words, he has cancer in his bone marrow and he takes monthly maintenance chemo. And so far, he's held off. He runs, he works out, he's active. You wouldn't know it, but it's lurking. And every time he goes for his either 6-month or 12-month checkup, the doctor pulls out a piece of paper and a pencil and draws a bell curve and says, at some point this is going to come back. And when it does, you're going to know it. And so far, he's beat the bell curve. I think it's been 7 years, I think. So at any rate, we were talking one day, and he said, "Hey, Brian Zond is going to Israel, and would you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd really." Okay, hold on, I got to punch the right button. I said, "I really would like to go." I am not technically connected here. Hold on. Let me make this work here. Come on, that's the one I want. No. It's working on my phone just fine. Okay. Brian Zond is the fellow on the left. That is a really blown out picture of a amphitheater at Caesarea Maritime is what it's called, or Caesarea Maritima. What that is this is the area where Herod's palace was on the coast of the Mediterranean. And one of those pictures that I found late that I didn't get to add is, and I can show it another time, but it is of the foundation of Herod's palace that actually goes out now into the Mediterranean. They're just like people today that like to live on the ocean, or on the sea, on water, and that's where Herod would come, and sometimes Pilate would stay in Herod's palace while Herod was away. And when we talk about Pilate going to Jerusalem during Passover, he was coming here at what's now called Jaffa, which is Joppa, and he would make his way inland to Jerusalem, and he would come from the west. And so when we celebrate Palm Sunday, we recognize that Jesus came into Jerusalem from the east gate. We'll have a picture later of that, but he's coming in from the west. So Brian has been going, I think he said, 25 years to Israel. And my pastor growing up went, I mentioned that, so I'm going to do all the best I can. Now I understand why he had those cartridges full of slides. I know now. I mean, he had wheels of them. And his wife is up in the top. That's Perry. She's the organizational genius behind the group. And then right in the center of the bottom picture is Mona. You don't get to take a trip without an in-country certified guide. So they take a test, and they have to pass the test, and they have to retake it. I believe it's every year, every 2 years. And so she is 37 years old. She's Kimberly's age, has 4 children, married a fellow from Greece, lived there for a little while, and is originally from Nazareth. And so she would be an Arabic Christian in Israel. And she has 2 degrees, working on her 3rd one. She wants to get involved in archaeology. And so generally in these sorts of trips, what happens is you have your pastor guide who has set the agenda for what will be looked, what will be said, what stories might be covered, what locations will be visited. And then when you get to this place, for example, outside of the entrance to the amphitheater, Mona stopped and gave us some background, archaeology, some of the historical kind of connections that are part of the requirement for a guide in Israel. And then you can see Brian's got his little notepad out, and he's going to talk about some of the events that went on in that particular time. Should I just start it over? That's a great picture, isn't it? All right, hold on. Let me get all that out of the way. Hey. It's Did it open back up? I've got a great slideshow on my phone, by the way. I mean, it's really good on my phone. You just going to do it? Okay, well, I better follow along with you so I know what I put up here. Okay, so this is the amphitheater. So the picture that you saw of Brian, we're sitting in that just second lower section. And right here you can see the group there on the left. There were 4 or 5 groups when we got there. And they just kind of spread out. And so we're looking from the Mediterranean side, looking back toward the amphitheater. And there are these large, you can see the large stones. Pay attention to those because they'll come back up, but the large stones. And so they've done some excavating, they've done that. And then I didn't know if you knew, but the next slide, they have horse racing back there. It's a hippodrome. And so just to the north of where the amphitheater is and Herod's Palace would be, you can see the inside of the track and the stands where people would watch it. So they had horse races by the sea. And so it's a pretty elaborate, very large area, which would mean that Rome wanted everyone to know sort of what wealth they had, what sort of power they had, what sort of enjoyment they get to have while everyone else doesn't. And so in the next slide, what our days began with this. So play that one, Brad. If it'll play.
We are on our way to Gethsemane. We'll talk about Gethsemane there, but I've chosen the psalm, Psalm 61. It's a psalm offered by one in anguish, and of course we know that Gethsemane is a place of anguish for Jesus. This is a psalm attributed to King David, but it uses such grandiose language that ultimately it can only be fulfilled by the King of Kings, the Son of David, who is greater than David. We offer this as prayer. Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you are my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. Let me abide in your tent forever, find refuge under the shelter of your wings. For you, O God, have heard my vows. You have given me the heritage of those who fear your name. Prolong the life of the king. May his years endure to all generations. May he be enthroned forever before God. Appoint steadfast love and faithfulness to watch over him. So I will always sing praises to your name as I pay my vows day after day. Amen. Lord, we dedicate this day to you. I do pray that we would see what we should see, hear what we should hear, think what we should think, feel what we should feel. Lord, I ask that for many this will be their last day in this city. I pray that the Holy Spirit would do a work, and that what is intended to happen while we are here would occur for each and every pilgrim. We dedicate this day to you. In fact, we say this is the day which the Lord hath made. We will rejoice and be glad in it. Amen and amen.
Hallelujah. Let's select the next one. So I'm a little bit out of order, but because Brian, if you heard him say that's our last day, our schedule got a little bit out of kilter because one of the places that we were supposed to go was closed on Monday. So we would have already actually been to Gethsemane, but we went to Gethsemane on the last day because one of the other places we were scheduled to go on the first Monday or the second Monday was we weren't going to be able to do that. So we kind of worked things around. Let me do something real quick. Brian started Word of Life Church in St. Joe's, Missouri 40 years ago. He's the founding pastor, and he just celebrated his 40th anniversary there. He's in his early 60s, and I don't know if this is the case, but my guess is that if he started going to Israel about 25 years ago, that's getting close to the time period where he kind of had a really significant shift in his thinking. And I've since that time I read a few of his books, and I don't know why he would have thought anything other than what he now thinks, but that's just me. So we kind of share that, and he's just a really good guy. We had planned to have him before the pandemic to come to a prayer school. He does a prayer school at his church. They have a crazy prayer room. It's unbelievable. I've never been to it, but I've seen the pictures of it. But he's just a really nice guy, and Perry is well. So we spend the night in Jerusalem, not Jerusalem. We spend the night in Tel Aviv, and then left the hotel. And we didn't want to pay the extra single room fee. You ever been on one of these? So they put me and Jason together. We said we'll share a room. We didn't know that meant share a bed. The only hotel that we actually had separate beds was in Bethlehem. Not sure if that's said anything about Palestinian hospitality over Israeli hospitality, but in every other place we stayed, we got to share a bed. So I'm now his plus one, he says. At any rate, and then we made our way up to Caesarea Maritime, and then we left there and we saw the Roman aqueducts. So there's just you can see some remnants of the aqueducts and the design architecture. Listen, these folks were smart. When we want to kind of think that maybe we're more advanced and we're more intelligent, when you think about the size of stones that they were moving around to build walls and build buildings, I don't know how they did it. So the next stop was Mount Carmel. Anybody know what Mount Carmel's famous for? Well, it's very high, yes. It's where Elijah battled the prophets of Baal. And the one reason I took this picture was when you grow up and you look at the map in the back of your Bible, you have no way to approximate how far it is from one to the other, even if they give you a scale, right? So if you're looking at say, where Jerusalem would be, and then you're looking at where Galilee is, and you're a kid, you're going like, that's a long way, Then you get there and you find out it's really not. So you see that, it's not in this picture, so I'll tell you it's in the next one, but hold on, Brad. So this is the top of Mount Carmel. It's adjacent to a church. That's one thing you learn. Nearly everywhere there's a significant event in the life of Jesus or in the scriptures that they can mark, there's generally a church. Someone's got a church. They're not big ones, but they're churches. And so if you can follow you see the highway that kind of goes kind of northeast on the picture, and then you can see that lower, just a little lower draw. That's the Wadi Kishon. And when Elijah finished off the prophets of Baal, he took them down and he executed them, and their blood ran in the Wadi Kishon, which is kind of what you and I would call them dry creek beds. That's what we would call them, that are only full in the rainy season. And we happen to be there in that time period where everything's green. We were told in a few months that would all be brown. So we were there. And we were there at the coldest time, the coldest March in 50 years, we were told. So it was pretty cold. But what you can see from Mount Carmel, slide that, Brad. What you can see from Mount Carmel from another direction, see that mounded hill? That's Mount Tabor. That's, anybody, Mount Tabor? That's the Mount of Transfiguration. So from Mount Carmel, where you had Elijah battle the prophets of Baal, Mount Tabor is where Jesus was transfigured and Moses and Elijah accompanied him. That's how close. I know that you're going, well, Todd, it looks like it's way over there. We were just this side of that in 30, 40 minutes. So it's not as far as it appears. So all that to say that immediately the first thing that I recognize is what I thought was so spread out and probably took a long time to get there. And sure, I know they were walking and we were in a tour bus, so it took a little bit longer, but it sure is not as spread out as you think it is. It is. And so these different locations were all around them of where God did things. So they could look over there and see that hill, and they could look over there and see that mountain. They knew the history just by looking at the geography around them. And this next slide is the church that's there. And if you can see that rail in the upper left, there's a staircase that takes you up, and where that rail is that's that kind of viewing area where you're out on the top of Mount Carmel. And I don't know, did I have? No, okay. And so the next slide will show you kind of what the inside of that little church looks like. So it is not really big. I'm not sure our whole group could have gotten in there, and there were 45 of us. But everywhere there is generally a church that is a marker reminder of whatever event. Just across from the door, the door of the church is a big statue. I think it's supposed to kind of commemorate Elijah and the event. I'll leave some of my editorial commenting out of the program. But it's a beautiful place. Then we drove over to Megiddo. Anybody know why Megiddo is important in the Bible? How many of you heard about Armageddon? Armageddon. Har Megiddo. That is how it is in Hebrew. And Megiddo is from Mount Carmel toward that mountain, Mount Tabor. You just kind of go that direction and you get to the Mount of Megiddo. And it's not terribly tall. Doesn't seem to be as tall as, say, Mount Carmel. But it is an elevator. It was a very prominent area. A lot of battles, not just those recorded in Revelation or referred to in Revelation, but just because of its location, there were often a lot of battles. This is a very large area, and at Megiddo, King Ahab, had some very important technological advances. We have grain silos above the ground. They have huge rock grain bins right below the ground where they dug the rock out, and that's where they kept their grain. And so there are a few of those in and around. You can see kind of the outline of buildings. And then another feature of the area in terms of archaeology is you can see how they've worked their way down. So in archaeology is where they come up and tell us kind of what we're looking at in the Bible and what time period this or that was, is you start your dig, and when you run into some common elements, you start looking what's there. And you might find coins, you might find broken farming type implements, you might find different kinds of metal, and depending on where you find that in the dig on the way down, helps you determine about what time frame those things were, or what group of people were likely living in those locations at any given year. I was trying to remember, I wrote it down somewhere, but I couldn't find it. I was trying to remember what the significance of the round little collection of rocks is, but it is a kind of a monument to the dig that is going on there and what they find. And so they have students coming all the time to all these places, and it's a slow dig. I mean, it's a slow, when you've seen them with brushes and gloves, it's not just make-believe. They're really slowly working through the dirt, they're working through the rocks. They're looking for any indication to say what time period and what was life like. And so archaeology is really, really important. In fact, I just was afraid I wouldn't have enough time, but they made a new discovery below the Western Wall in Israel just a few years ago. Just opened up a section of it. And you go down below ground into this area they've discovered, and there's a below ground amphitheater, there's water reservoirs, there are hot baths there, and the rocks, the stones are monstrous. So when we hear people tell us, or we pick up a commentary, or we hear a minister say, hey, they made this discovery, students in Israel and from around the world are spending time, weeks and months, just slowly digging away. And that's how we know more today than we did then. So while we may have started out thinking one thing about here's what they did in that era, there's a chance that archaeology may say, well, we had to rethink that. And so that's Tel Megiddo. And the agriculture this time of year is beautiful, huh? I mean, look at that. That is looking out from Tel Megiddo out into the valley. I think it's the Jezreel Valley. And it's just crops. I mean, it's really, really beautiful. And to tell me that was going to turn brown in a few months, I'd say, no, probably not. But they say that it would. I'm going to stop for just a second and say the other important event that happened on Mount Megiddo happened in the Old Testament. And it was the enemy had surrounded Israel, and there was nowhere to turn, no way out. And God rescued the people and fought the battle for them. Now, that's really important because we've popularized a battle at Megiddo in Revelation, when John's probably not talking about what we thought he's been talking about. It's probably a reference to say that God's always fighting our battles even when we don't know it, and we're always going to win. Because the theme at the end of the day in Revelation is God wins. And if God wins, God's people win. So the idea that we're waiting on some monstrous battle for all the armies of the earth, you couldn't get the armies of the earth in this little piece of ground. So the idea that we've got, we're going to meet, whether you're going to think of China coming or Russia coming or whoever's coming, and going to surround, it's just not possible, topographically. It's more likely that John is, in fact, I think you need to read the Old Testament to know what's going on in Revelation, but you didn't come for a Bible study tonight. But that's really important. So when you see that, you're going like, well, how's all that going to get here? I mean, how are those battles going to take place? And so John's probably talking about something different. Just as we left kind of the tell where they're doing the digs, we went to the whatever direction. I'm going to say it's east. And the next slide, one thing Ahab did was water was always an issue. And so I can't remember how many steps, but I think you step down 200 some odd steps, and you have to walk up another, seems like 100. But you're going down into Ahab's well-devised water chamber where water can be stored, because if you got your water cut off and you were in battle, that was it. So he had this elaborate system where if they cut off the natural flowing waters into Megiddo, he had a way to get water and a way to survive. Sieges were when they would surround and try to cut off your food and your water. And that was kind of a battle plan back in the day. And so it's pretty cool. The reason I don't know how many steps is they told there were a few older senior folks on our trip, and they want to make sure they knew that's how far it was down and how far it is up. And if you don't want to do that, there's another way around. We had an older couple whose son and daughter-in-law took them. And I think I told this story maybe to somebody, but the Foltzes called Perry and said, hey, what's the age limit? Is there an age limit on the trip? And she's thinking children. He says, well, 10 is really our cutoff. And so what about the other direction? We said, we've never been asked that question. So Mr. Foltz's son is a doctor, and they cortisoned up his knee, and at 90, I think, his wife was 85, and he was 90. This was probably the only one of the things they didn't do, was take the steps to go down to see this waterway. This next slide is a grain bin I was talking about. This is where they stored grain. Just looks like a big cistern and rock, and that's where they stored their grain. And then from there, we went to Tiberias, which we would know was the Sea of Galilee, and that's from the hotel room. And it was cloudy, and I've got several of those, but I didn't think you needed to see all my different pictures of the Sea of Galilee. But that is the sea that when we talk about Jesus walking on water, when we talk about Jesus teaching and then tells the disciples, hey, go cast your nets, and it's like, we fished all, come on, we're not gonna catch anything we haven't. And then they go out and they catch more than they can, carry in. It happened multiple times where Jesus had events. When we hear that Jesus went across to the other side, he's going from this side of Galilee to, say, the Gerasene or Gadara. So you remember where it says that Jesus went to the other side, and there was a man who was possessed of a demon that lived among the tombs? Well, you go across Galilee. And so when, I think about that, and they say they followed Jesus from one side to the other, and, get in the boat and I'll meet you there and those sorts of things. I mean, you really can see where they probably could have taken a crowd around it. It would have taken them a little bit, but you could see and it's deep. Oh, it's really deep. So you see what looks like a mountain range in the background. So there's two of those. And we didn't realize how many earthquakes, but there was an earthquake while we were there. You have a kind of a mountain range and a mountain range, and right in the center of the valley that runs from Mount Hermon all the way down to Jerusalem is where the plates are moving back and forth. And so they have earthquakes a lot. And I had no idea. But Galilee is going to be kind of in the center. And so if you've heard of the I think I'll say it right, fjords, like in Alaska, really, really, the walls are like this and really, really deep. Galilee is pretty deep. So is the Dead Sea. So I don't know, what time is it? The next one, Brad. So next place we went to is Nazareth. So we settled into the hotel and we got up in the morning and we went to Nazareth, and you can see it was raining, but I kind of wanted you to get kind of a feel for kind of what goes on, because if you ever take a trip, if we were to ever think that maybe we would like to put a trip together, this is kind of how it goes. So we got on the bus, and Brian or Perry would read a scripture and the other would pray, and that would kind of set the tone for where we would get an outline of where we're going, what we're doing, and then we would stop. And now we didn't do this every place, so it's not like the preacher was hurting to preach sermons every time we hit a spot. But to give some background, I thought this is pretty fascinating, so that maybe some other slides will make sense. So this is a short video where we showed up at Nazareth, and well, anyway, play it.
Nazareth. Jesus is known as Jesus of Nazareth 16 times in the gospel. Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus Christ, well, of course, Christ is the title, the christened one, the Mashiach, the Messiah. But, his name, he's going to be identified Jesus of Nazareth. And in fact, when he's crucified, Pilate has a inscription on his cross in Aramaic and Latin and Greek, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. We're going to visit today both an Orthodox church. How many of you have never been inside of an Eastern Orthodox church? At least half of you. We're going to visit an Eastern Orthodox church, which is very different. Most of us probably have some sort of Protestant affiliation, and we are used to thinking that the primary divide within the church is between Catholic and Protestant, or you might even say Catholic Orthodox and Protestant, and there's some truth to that, but there's probably just as much truth to say that there is the divide between East and West. Catholics and Protestants share a lot in common that is very different from the entire Eastern world of the various Orthodox traditions. And I want to say something very clearly about how I feel about ecumenism, being ecumenical. I'm deeply ecumenical. None of this is untrue. I'm telling you, I could belong to any of the major streams. I just really don't. And I think that's kind of a poverty. I think it's probably best to have deep-rooted commitment to one of the major traditions within Christian history. I just don't. I'm a Jesus movement vagabond that never really took root in any one place, and so I'm just riding the rails of eclectic Christianity like some sort of hobo. But what I've learned is to have deep respect for all of them. If you're on the quest for the one true church, good luck, God bless you. I think I've found the one true church, and it's the church. But even in saying that, I don't want to indicate that I have some sort of superiority where I'm just standing objectively above it all, too good to belong to anyone. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that for me, the dice just rolled in such a way that I'm kind of a non-denominational dude, but I love all of them. I have a particular respect for both the Orthodox and Catholic traditions because there's no accounting for any of us without them. They are grandma and grandpa. And when you show up at the family reunion, you don't have to agree with everything that grandma and grandpa believe, but you can't make fun of them because they're the matriarch and patriarch. In my way of thinking, and this is my way of thinking, I'm not saying this is a scholarly, analytical truth, I'm just saying this is how I think about it. I see the body of Christ as a 7-branch menorah consisting of Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, Anglican Communion, Protestant in its many variations, Anabaptist, which is distinctive, Evangelical, which is more of a mood, and Charismatic Pentecostal. And I love them all. I could belong to any of them. I have visited, spoken, ministered in all of those contexts. Yes, I have even spoken at an Orthodox conference. I don't know how that happened, but it did. And so I love Orthodox mystery and Catholic beauty and Anglican liturgy and Protestant audacity. I mean, sometimes you just need to reform something, you know, and that takes a bit of audacity to do that. And Anabaptist peacemaking and evangelical energy. Say what you want about evangelicals, they got energy. They'll come to church 5 times a week and, you know, do things. Good or bad. And I like the charismatic Pentecostal reality or experience of the Spirit. And so we're going to be in an Orthodox church. We're going to be in a Catholic church. I love them. And I want to read something now that has to do. Perry, will you come hold this for me? Because I just don't want my Bible to get wet, because then it's wet forever. You don't have to keep me dry, but keep my Bible dry. Just hear the word of the Lord. In the 6th month, the angel Gabriel was sent by God to a town in Galilee called Nazareth, to a virgin engaged to a man who was Joseph of the house of David. The virgin's name was Mary. And he came to her and said, "Greetings, favored one, the Lord is with you." But she was much perplexed by his words and pondered what sort of greeting this might be. The angel said to her, "Do not be afraid, Mary, for you have found favor with God. And now you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you will name him Jesus. He will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give to him the throne of his ancestor David. He will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and of his kingdom there will be no end." Mary said to the angel, "How can this be? I am a virgin." The angel said to her, "The Holy Spirit will come upon you, and the power of the Most High will overshadow you. Therefore the child to be born will be holy. He will be called Son of God. And now, your relative Elizabeth, in her old age, has also conceived a son, and this is the 6th month of her who was said to be barren. For nothing will be impossible with God." Then Mary said, "Here am I, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word." Then the angel departed from her. Mary is utterly unique, of course.
So one of the things that I wanted to show that is there are a lot of images of Mary, and for many of us that makes us a little bit uncomfortable, but you can understand that in Nazareth, where Mary lived, plus where they lived after they had returned from Egypt, Nazareth is a pretty important place. And the fact that there is an Eastern Orthodox, anybody ever been in an Eastern Orthodox church? Okay, it's just two of us. You're in for a treat. You would know if you had, and it is quite a thing. And so everywhere there, in fact, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in the old city of Jerusalem is used by both Catholics and Orthodox, and several other churches. You ready for this? I'll jump ahead. They have to give the keys to the church to a Muslim couple, so there'll be no fighting over who gets in and who doesn't. That's pretty weird, but that's true. I think that family's been doing that for 100 years, 125 years. So this is, you can see the kind of the reminder of Mary at this kind of a memorial. And that's where we kind of started. And from there we went to the next place, which is, this is a Eastern Orthodox church. And you can tell by the architecture it's something different, and then it is. So there is, and this is traditional, by the way. So not to bore you, but all the icons on the wall tell the history of the Eastern Orthodox Church. Now, when we say Eastern Orthodox Church, it's like saying Baptist. Which version? Because you've got Ethiopian, you've got Syrian, you've got Egyptian, you've got Greek, you've got different, mostly ethnic / Eastern Orthodox churches. And so the Eastern Orthodox Church is like the Catholic Church in the sense that they believe they can trace their history all the way back to Jesus. And so you have it set up kind of like a Holy of Holies. So behind that is kind of the special place of worship. But if you can see, it's kind of hard in this picture. Maybe it'll be, the next one. You can see how ornate things are. See all the imagery and how it's adorned. The artistry is something incredible. And just as a matter of note, the reason that the Eastern Church broke with the Western Church was actually over icons. The Western Church said those were idols, and the Eastern Church said they're aids. Idols, you think you're worshiping something in aid, you're saying, when I look at that, I see something beautiful, and it reminds me of something about. So the Christ of Sinai is a favorite icon of mine, but that's kind of what you have. And so ceilings, you can see the ceiling in the back, the angel in the back. I mean, ceilings are all done. There's always something, wherever you can put some art, there is art in the Eastern Church. Next slide, Brad. Off to the side, there's this little catacomb-like area, and there is a small altar and a painting and these old lights, and I just knew you had to see that because, it's just the architecture is pretty cool. So they tell the story behind that. And next slide, you've got these gold inlaid objects hanging everywhere. It's really ornate. And all the scenes depict something from the life of Jesus or a story from the Old Testament. They're not make-believe things. They're all telling a story. And then we went from there. We went to the Catholic Church in Nazareth, and the lighting wasn't very good. So this is kind of a mix of cell phone and my good camera. But this is a massive building. I mean, this is a massive, massive building. And there's kind of a centerpiece altar, but you can't go in there. They're doing some remodeling, so you can see us. We're walking down, and there's a little catacomb we're looking into, but I couldn't get a good picture out of that one. But here's the ceiling in this place, different, no images. Now it's beautiful, but no images. You won't find an icon one in any of the Catholic churches, really anywhere, but certainly not competing in Jerusalem. Or in Israel. This is actually what I did get a picture. That's actually what we were looking at walking down the steps, just another altar. And you can kind of see how old the church is. They're just these catacombs that go back, and you don't get to go back in there. And then you go to the main worship area, and you've got Now, in this one, you can have certain scenes, but these wouldn't be called icons. These would be called like mosaics, or they would be commissioned pieces of art. And in this church, you had different representations of Mary all along the. I mean, it's a very larger than this space. This is the Immaculate Conception representing the United States. The woman clothed with the sun, Apocalypse 12, is the prototype for Mary and the church. Mary is the expression in multifaceted splendor that the grandeur of God will flame out like shining from the shock foil. Mary, our mother, conceived immaculately, hovers at the dawn of our sacred and cosmic destiny. And so I just thought, well, I found one to the United States. I snapped the shot. But there's one to other countries just all around the room. And they're pretty elaborate as well. Outside, when you go outside, nearly to every country there is one of these. And I don't know exactly what they are, but that's for Ukraine. And since things had just started, everyone was interested, so they moved the one to Ukraine to the front gate. They can move them around. And so because what was going on in the Ukraine, they moved this particular image up to the front, where when you walk into the courtyard, you remember to pray for Ukraine. And something interesting here, this is a statue of Mary. Now, before we show the next slide, can you see anything interesting about this statue? Look really as carefully as you can. You notice anything? Next slide. What is that around Mary's feet? Genesis 3. Serpent. You'll bruise his head. So I just thought that was kind of interesting. They pointed that out. And so all that to say that everything they do with architecture and art has a meaning. There's something they're trying to, in every way they can, to tell the story. That's what they do. From Nazareth, we went to Capernaum. Now, if I were asked what my favorite place was, this may have been my favorite stop, although the old city was pretty hard to beat. But Capernaum was the headquarters of the disciples. It's where Peter's mother-in-law's home was, possibly their go-to location for rest and kind of getting together. And this is just right there. And Jesus did a lot of teaching right here at this particular kind of location. How do we know that? Because this is how close the city of Capernaum is to the water. And these, by the way, don't meet current building code requirements. They're not big enough. But these look small. So if you can imagine, this is kind of how the houses were kind of cobbled together, and these are the remains. And this is a church. What did I say about churches? Churches pop up at every place where something important or some important person was, and that to me looked like a spaceship. I don't know why, but the picture is taken from the synagogue in Capernaum. Okay? So, doesn't look too far, does it? That church is sitting on top of the house that is believed to be Peter's mother-in-law's house. So when Jesus went to Capernaum and he took out the Isaiah scroll and he stood and read in Luke 4, and then he got up and he went and he healed Peter's mother-in-law. Well, I would think, man, he must have had to take a 2 or 3 days journey. He might have had to walk the length of a full-size basketball court, maybe. That close. It was in that moment where you realize, man, everything really happened right here. And it was the particularity of everything just here. In fact, the next slide, that is actually that round piece. There's a glass floor in the church. Next slide. where you look down into the house. They think was Mary's house. That's a glass cover with the remains of the old house, and they built the church over the top of that as a marker, as a reminder of the life of Jesus. And then the next slide is looking back from the church to the synagogue. And remember I said pay attention to stones? So the original first century probably foundation stones are the ones right about ground level. They're larger than what you would find, and I don't think I kept the picture, but on this side over here, the stones on the next layer are not as big. And so they think that what we have is a first century foundation and then a fourth century rebuild. And then so here you can kind of see the differences. So you've got this layer, and then you've got kind of like what we would call what would we call that? Stem wall kind of thing that's kind of bigger, and it goes further back in. It's pretty fascinating. And then they're trying to maintain it, so you can see the assistance they're giving these columns. They've gone in and they've put a support in, and they've done that in several places. But they were pretty confident that this is the place where Jesus did a lot of his synagogue teaching when they were in Galilee, in around Galilee. And if you're going to go to Galilee, if you're going to go to the region of Tiberias, you have to eat St. Peter's fish. No, I ate it. I ate it. It was quite interesting. It was good. I think it's like St. Peter's fish is translated tilapia or something like that. But we had this restaurant. That's what they do. You get the fish, or you get something else, and they run them in there, man. I mean, tour group after tour group after tour group. That's why it's generally safe to tour, because everyone needs tourists in Israel, not just the Israelis. Everybody does. And then the next spot we went to is Magdala, or Magdala, for Mary Magdalene. Here's what's interesting. There is a hotel, and the owner bought the ground and was going to put a hotel there, and when they started doing their excavating work, they found this synagogue. So they had to move the hotel back and out of the way. And this is believed to be the synagogue at Magdala. And I don't know, I didn't. So if you can see the little box near the top of underneath the kind of pergola thing, that box, that square in there, that rectangle rather, is probably one of the places where they did the kind of most significant teaching. And then there are mosaics in the rocks that were used as teaching tools around. And then adjacent to the synagogue is Magdala, homes and places for purification. I didn't include all those pictures, but these, when you're going to get yourself ready to go for worship, you walk down into these pools, and they pump water out of them. They still have water out of them. But you've got kind of some old artifacts, and you've got the walls, and this is Magdala. And then out behind the hotel, there is the chapel of Mary Magdalene. And this is the ceiling artwork. It's pretty fascinating. There are pillars. I don't have them. There are pillars outside the place they worship, kind of in a big foyer. And around the pillars are the names of the women in the Bible, so that have been identified with Jesus. So Salome and Mary Magdalene and all the names of the women. So it's a play up to Mary Magdalene's role in the life of Jesus, and so it emphasizes women. This had to be my favorite piece of art. It was down in the basement place where I guess they have communion from time to time. It's the woman who's reaching out to touch the hem of Jesus' garment. So it had to be a woman in the story. And then I've got another piece. You're not supposed to take pictures of art, but I did. I get forgiveness, but there was a woman crying, which I'm assuming is another sort of kind of figure. In the chapel is a boat, the boat chapel. This is actually in the chapel, and that's, I'm assuming they have services there. There are a few pieces of artwork on the wall, but they're going to all be women, and they're going to be pointing to women that were affiliated with the story of Jesus. So we sat in there and we had a little talk. Brian did a little talk there. And, but that was a fake boat. This is a real boat. They found this, I think it was in no. You can look it up. It's on YouTube. But they were doing some excavating work, and they ran into this wood in the water. And the water had preserved the wood. Sounds weird, but the water had preserved the wood. So we watched this fascinating video of how they literally kept what they had intact. So the apparatus underneath is literally holding it together. The humidity has to be set just right, and they have to water it frequently. Otherwise, it would just crumble. But they believe this is a first century Galilean fishing boat, the remains of it. And the lengths they had to go to move that where they could put it back together is just, it's amazing. Craig, you ought to look that one up. You'd like that one. Here's another front shot of it, but you can kind of see how the boat might have looked. And then we went out on the Sea of Galilee, took a boat ride, sang hymns, listened to some scripture, and that was what our boat looked like right there. And so it's pretty moving to sing some hymns with a bunch of people you don't know out on the water. The guy who took all those videos, he and his wife, they live in Oklahoma City. So really neat couple. And then from there, we went to the Mount of Beatitudes. Blessed are they who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be satisfied. Really pretty garden areas. Obviously, still some things coming into bloom, but this flower was there, and I thought, Rose of Sharon, I felt we had to have a shot of that. And then there's the church. What did I tell you? A church. So here's the Mount of Beatitudes. You can see the Sea of Galilee in the background, and then inside the church is a normal communion table, and it's in the round. And I caught Brian meditating or kind of just reflecting. He's a pretty big introvert, so he tried to steal away as much time as he could to be our guide. And then the next place is Mount Marbell. I never heard. Have anybody ever heard of Mount Marbell? You have. You just didn't know it. There is a phrase that he went up to a mountain. I think it's 16 times in the New Testament, but it's never identified. They believe this is it, because from Mount Marbell you can look over and see all the places that Jesus would have been, all the areas that we would have a story associated with Jesus. So the places that I'm talking about, Capernaum and Magdala, and you can see from Mount Marbell. And I found about 50 other photos that would have been way better than this one, but that was after I already put this one together. I don't think, yeah. So you can see, here's the next one. From Mount Marbell, you can see, anybody know what mountain that might be? That's Mount Hermon. So there's a song about oil dripping or water dripping down Mount Hermon, like oil drips down Aaron's beard. Hermon, the strategic thing about Hermon is that's where all the invaders came from. All the invading countries came past Mount Hermon, came down the valley, and that's how they would come into Israel and do battle. So the Assyrians, the Syrians, they would come from Mount Hermon. They call him the old man because he's most of the time he's white-capped. And then I took this one. Doesn't show up as well. It's got a little shadow, but you can see in the bottom. Look at all the crops. All the crops in the foreground. So they're really heavily agricultural along the way. And then I had to throw in. I saw some animal. I asked him if it was. It's not, but I asked him if it was a marmot. Now, my second favorite place, still leaving room for the old city, is Beit Shan. So if a developer was going to build a hotel in Magdala and found a synagogue, a person or group were going to build a grocery store at Beit Shan. And when they began doing excavating work, this is what they found. It's one of the most magnificent archaeological discoveries in the last probably 20, 30 years. Maybe, I forget how long it is. It's amazing. I mean, we're talking, I could have stayed here and just kind of wandered around, try to figure it all out. But there were some workers, you kind of make them out in the center of that ground level floor, and they're putting a brand new top on that stage. And they're fixing some drainage right there, putting a drainage grate there. And they've unearthed this, and that amphitheater is in really, really good shape. I mean, those rocks are in really good shape. And then there's just stuff. There are public bathhouses in the back. And how they had steam rooms is just, it's something else. And so to give you kind of an elevation look, that's a hill we all climbed that sits above, and then you can take in all of Beit Shan. But that kind of gives you an idea of when they start taking down an area, cutting it down, that's a lot of dirt you got to move. A lot of dirt you got to move. It was, in some ways, considered kind of a debauched city, except, here's another, go back one, Brad. Okay, go another one. Next one. Forward. There we go. So they boil the water and the steam would come in, and those little pillars, there was a floor on top of that, and the steam would be underneath the floor, and that's kind of where they got their steam. And on the back side of that, they found a baptistry. So its reputation was to be a pretty seedy place, but they found a baptistry. So we had a little devotional next to the baptistry talking about Beit Shan in Israel. And then this is a picture from that high point, that little hill we climbed. That's what they've uncovered. And that just is pretty stinking amazing, you think? I mean, that's remarkable. And you have to be careful, what equipment you use or you'd lose. I mean, there's a pile over here on the foreground. There are piles of columns that have to be put together that they've got. And they've put some columns you can see on the left side. And then from there we headed to the Dead Sea and the Qumran and Masada. But I wondered about these date palms. Palm branches, and I thought, fact of the matter is, when we first started thinking about getting palms, they didn't have palm trees there. Yeah, it's a desert. They do have palms. In fact, not only do they raise them. I mean, this is like a date palm farm. And so this one, they're grown up. There's another one where they're all like that little one in 2/3 over. And there's another kind of crop that's about that size. And then in another area, they're so small that you could cover them with plastic 12 inches off the ground, where they just keep planting, and then dates are everywhere. Dates and palms. They just use them for about everything. And I thought, I got to show Patty. They have palm trees in Israel, and they have homelessness just like we do. In fact, this would be probably more akin to refugee communities. So this is moving from Tiberias or from Galilee. We're going south, and it's a long trip. And along the way, you can see little places like that. I'm not sure why I've got this next slide in there where I do. I think I've got them a little out, so we'll go with it. Okay, if I didn't tell you, you wouldn't know. So one of the big trades is olive wood, and so everyone hawks olive wood stuff. But Brian has met a Palestinian family whose business supports about 80 members of the family. And they use full pieces of olive wood. Those aren't like glued together. They're carved. I can't remember how many thousands. I thought, I'd love to have a Lord's Supper olive wood set. I go over and I look at the price, I'm like, I could have come to Israel for the price of that thing. Really nice people, very, very nice. And they had a room full of ornate stuff like this carved out of olive wood. And Brian likes to go there because during COVID and the shutdown, Israel told the Palestinians who dominantly live in Bethlehem when they couldn't be open, which meant also their banks. So we tend to hear one side. As evangelicals, we tend to hear one side of the whole Israel-Palestinian divide. I'm going to tell you, the Palestinians get a raw end of the deal. If you've ever read, I'll tell you what we talked about on the trip. If you've ever read the history of the South and really familiar with Jim Crow laws, that's what's going on in Palestine, among the Palestinians in Israel. That's probably the best characterization. We had a hotel meeting with a gentleman who heads a nonprofit to try to bring peace between Israelis and Palestinians. He's a Christian. And they are always at work trying to bring reconciliation to families, to people, to communities. And so this business is wholly Palestinian-owned, and they had been 2 years without income. In fact, the trips in March of this year were the first trips anyone had benefited off of tourism in Israel for 2 years. And a lot of them actually they didn't. Our bus driver is the first drive he'd made in 2 years. Fortunately, he owned a restaurant, but his restaurant got closed too. So he had to really make it work to survive. The other thing that they do in Israel is they have a particular kind of sand and glassware. And I just thought it was pretty, so you get to see it too. And then we went to, let's see, this is in Bethlehem. This is the Church of the Nativity. And I didn't scale that very good because what I was trying to get was, as they remodel this, they found these tapestries beneath some of the layered on remodel that had gone on, and so I had to be very careful. And then the floor, the original floor is actually about, I think it was maybe a half a foot to 2 feet. They had to go and build a floor above because they wanted to preserve the original floor, but you couldn't walk on it. It was in such bad shape. And so they had a piece out of the floor where you could kind of see that. But you see kind of how ornate the Church of the Nativity is. And so it's, next slide, there's some more Eastern Orthodox golden inlaid worship center. And then we went to, and it's located near here. And this is St. Jerome, one of the first to translate the Bible. And so these are in catacombs. So this is like down underneath, and you kind of going through there. He spent time in seclusion translating the Bible. And then we moved out of Bethlehem and went into the Old City, and this is, I think, the church, the Crusader Church of Anne, I think is the name of this church. It's right next to the pools of Bethesda. Remember the healing at the pools of Bethesda, where they waited on the waters to move and they needed someone to put them into the water because they thought the movement of the water had healing properties. So this is right there adjacent, beautiful courtyard just beyond the building. And then we went inside, and I want you to just kind of see what it looked like. And then I think, is the next one, isn't it like 30 seconds or something, Brad? Yeah, it's a little bit. Listen to this. This sounds awesome. If I do say so myself. That's 45 people. That's our group, 45 people. If I knew how to run a camera, that would be better. Isn't that beautiful, huh? The acoustics. Woo. Somebody knew some harmony in that group. It must be. I think there's the next, do the next one, Brad. It's only 40 seconds. Outside and went and saw the pools of Bethesda. The next picture a little bit better. You can see how wide how that area is, and there are these little places for pools all in this little courtyard area, and then it drops off down a hill, and it's pretty fascinating. I don't know how I missed out on getting the upper room in there, but you see that? You know what those are? Pelicans. So when you go into the upper room where they had the Last Supper, where Jesus washed the disciples' feet, there's a column in the corner, and at the top of the column is this carving, pelicans. And the early Christians, they really had a fancy for birds. Ostrich was a bird that some Christians paid a lot of attention to, because an ostrich mom would never get so far that while it was eating, it couldn't see its egg. So it was always able to eat and watch its egg at the same time. Pelican mothers, when they fear that their young will die from a lack of water, say in a drought or something, will take their beak and pierce their chest so that their young may drink their blood and live while the mom dies. So for the early church, the idea of someone giving their life for another was epitomized in how they adorned their architecture. And so in the upper room, this is my body, this is my blood. And so this was kind of a way to mark that. Next picture is selfie. No, that's Stephen's Gate. I forgot to get it coming this way, so we're kind of leaving out of the old city through Stephen's Gate. And then the next picture is we are standing at Caiaphas's palace. And that's Brian and obviously me. And then just over the edge of the rails, if you look down, you're looking at the city of David. And sad story they told us about the city of David is all inhabited by mostly Palestinians, except if an Israeli came to your house, you'd have to give up your house. And so you could look down in there, that area, down from kind of this high place, and you could see Israeli flags flying over some of the houses, because once they put their flag over the house, it couldn't be taken back. But you could, so this is a serious, issue going on. This next picture is supposed to be a panoramic. Doesn't show up really good on this kind of deal, but that's kind of what you'd see looking in that area, and kind of shading to the left, you'd be getting toward the Mount of Olives. Inside of the church there, that is over the place where Caiaphas' palace was, is inside the church, just like the one where the glass was over Peter's mother-in-law's house. This is a glass over the entrance to a cell. So we've often thought that Caiaphas was just a religious leader. But the Sanhedrin and the Caiaphas were actually more your municipal leaders. So you had Herod, then you had Pilate, and then you had your high priests who functioned municipally, not just religiously. They enforced municipal law. So that's why Jesus was tried by Caiaphas, not just for the religious purposes, but for municipal purposes. He was a threat. He was going to break the peace. And so the way the cell worked is they would put you, they would possibly scourge you, they would try you, and then they would put you in a harness, and they would lower you through the hole down into a cell. And the next picture is the cell. We'll forego the video. I can show it another time. But in this cell here, we squeezed 45 of us in here. Some of us standing on stairs. It is literally a rock-hewn hole. And then there are on this wall, there are like some openings where you might could take a stick and reach out and hand some food, or you could, give some kind of aid if you felt hospitable at that point. Other places where it looked like they were possibly chaining some prisoners around those stone, looked like iron rods you'd see on a jail cell. But we read Psalm 88, I think. Brian read Psalm 88, which is very descriptive of thinking about Jesus being in this cell before he was crucified. And so we'll forego that. Then outside is a monument to Peter's denial. And so Peter's in the foreground, and then there's a soldier, and then there are the two who are asking him, "Don't you know who Jesus is?" And so this is, right there, a reminder of Peter's denial. Does that look like anything, maybe? I can't remember who it was sitting across the street, which is back this way, and they looked over and said, that looks like a skull. The problem is, over time, the nose has fallen off a little bit. But if you get the two inset eyes, and nearly at the bottom of the picture, kind of just 2/3 to the right, there's a place where if you're standing there looking at it, you could make out a nose if you wanted to. And they think that could be Golgotha. Could be the place of the skull. And you can see this from a place called the Garden Tomb. And this is the place of the Garden Tomb. We happened to be there, and while we were there, there was a knife incident we didn't know about. We saw these police and didn't know that they were chasing down someone who had, I think, maybe tried to assault a police officer. Not sure. It's very small, very little. You about can get 3 people in there, and then you walk out. But that's possibly the Garden Tomb, possibly where Jesus was buried. We all went, and the guide took us around, talked about Golgotha, talked about the Garden Tomb, and then there was a little place we had communion together, which was really cool. And then I'm trying to speed up here. We're past time. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So if that was the Garden Tomb, and maybe that's where it was, there are others who think this is where Jesus was buried. And it's pretty interesting. So this is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre that I mentioned earlier, where it's shared by multiple groups. In fact, if you can't see it on this side of the picture, if that wall extended over, there's a door and another small church with like a smaller chapel on a second floor that's part of the group of churches that meet there at the side of the Holy Sepulchre. Next slide. I think this is a fascinating. That they put that ladder to nowhere there. It's been there. It's never been moved. I think it's when they built it, someone put it there, and well, it's pretty well remained. Inside this place, and it's ornate, by the way. I mean, it's crazy. You walk in, and there's some kind of slab, and I guess they think Jesus laid on it, and they're kissing it, and they're touching it, and they're laying on it, and they're all kinds of stuff. But this is the Holy Sepulchre. And so this would be the face side is on the right. You can kind of see the kind of structures on the right. So this is the side, it's the back, and you're getting in line, and it's also very small. I mean, it's you hit your head, and if you're in there too long, the guy sitting in there will tell you about it. And so no pictures, no cameras, you can't take anything in there. I snapped a few, obviously, outside, but not inside the Holy Sepulchre. So this is a place. I'll try to find it. My friend Jason, after seeing both these places, he wrote something I thought really good about, so which place is it? And I'll try to get that. And then the next slide is of the Wailing Wall. And so I do have a little piece of it with a prayer I wrote on it. It's crammed in the cracks of one of those big rocks over there. That's what they do. And it's wild. I caught a video of a guy. They gyrate a little bit. I mean, you must have some spirit-filled worshipers there, because they do some really interesting movements. The one thing I'm going to say about this is I don't understand how it works, but many of these men don't work. There's some sort of arrangement that if you're part of a religious order, the government actually pays you. So if you can see the fella in the hat here in the chair on the bottom right, so there are a variety of different hats. The hat is an indication of what teacher you're following. So you can see some pretty interesting hats. So when they got on the plane with us to come home, they'd have these big hat boxes to bring them back in. And if you've seen those Russian hats that, got the fur and they're kind of, like this and flat. Oh, we went into a place where they were doing their Jewish studies, and they're reading the Torah, and they got their hats on, and they're just going at their studies. But that's what we learned. We learned that you reach a certain level, you get a hat, and your hat is reflective of the particular school that you're involved in. And then the last picture is this is our group. And I realize, having gone through this, that I left out lots of different places. So I'm not, if you wanted me to do it again someday, we might. But this is, I want you to see the Dome of the Rock. They don't go in there. That's not really the place they worship. But the old city is from there, from that wall, kind of back. And there are different quarters in the old city. So you got the Muslim quarter, the Jewish quarter, you got the Christian quarter. And they all pretty much have the same thing. They'll have particular restaurants and vendors. We ran into a place one night, Jason and I did, just kind of walking around after we got to the old city, and ran to icon sales place. When Russian Jews were expelled, I think it was 1 million of them eventually came into Israel, and the only way they could get their money out was by buying icons and then bringing them and selling them, because they couldn't carry their money out. So they brought with them Orthodox icons, and so they clean them up and they sell them, and that's how they get their money back. They got their money out of Russia by buying Orthodox artwork. which could get us into the whole Russia-Ukraine thing, because that is really, frankly, a religious war right now, more than it is anything else. You've got the head poobah in Russia who's sanctioning Putin's war, and they're attaching religious meaning to it all. Terrible. But there it is. If you've been watching the bulletin a few weeks, I've had the East Wall, and the East Gate is closed. The picture I wished I had was of the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. I've got them, I promise. I've had 1,000+ pictures. But what I want to leave you with is this. From the top of the Mount of Olives almost all the way down to the Kidron Valley. And the Kidron Valley is where Abram gave his first tithe to Melchizedek. The Kidron Valley is the valley that runs between the Mount of Olives and Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And it sounds like a long way. It's not. We walked it. It's not long. It looks like it's steep. But just as you go down the Mount of Olives, you look over to your left, and there are concrete caskets from just below the top of the mountain all the way down to Kidron Valley, and in places running all the way up to the East Wall. Because they believe that they want to be closest to the old city when the Messiah comes. And they have to pay a premium the closer you get to the East Wall. It's sad. I mean, when I say caskets, folks, I'm telling you, I don't know how to, I'll have to blow a few of those up. I'm telling you, caskets for acres. For acres and acres and acres. And they closed the East Gate. And that's the gate that the Messiah is supposed to come through. So maybe we need to pray that they realize that the Messiah has come, and they don't need to worry about opening the gate, nor do they need to worry about rebuilding the temple. It's unnecessary. So, any quick questions? I feel like I cheated you. Garden of Gethsemane's pictures are really something. Church of the Nations, right there next to the Garden of Gethsemane, is it's beautiful. It's just flat beautiful. So, any? Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to go. And who knows, maybe one of these days, if we have a group that want to go, we could figure out how to make that happen. But there you go. All right. Thank you.